I've been so excited. This has been such a great day. So many interesting things, and we did. Were any of you in my morning session? Oh, good. You're not the same because I'm going to do some of the same things. In fact, yesterday when I was practicing my morning session, I ended up talking about this. I'm like, no, that's not right. My name is Tarla Gernert. I love starting programs. I did a session this morning about starting your dream program. Whenever I was looking at things, I've started about 6 or 7 different programs. And it's interesting because as I've started programs, I find out that people have copied what we've done and are starting programs similar. So that's really exciting to me. But today this afternoon, we're going to talk about high school, teens, all that fun stuff. How many of you went to public school? How many of you went to private school? How many of you went to virtual? Anybody homeschool? Very interesting. I went to, my education is a little bit different. Whenever I went to high school from 7th through 12th grade, I was in the 1970s, there was a Christian school movement where churches developed schools, and sometimes I say that I was homeschooled in the basement of a church. I had my workbook, and you had to read your workbook and answer your questions and memorize your answers to take the test. That was the kind of school that I did. It didn't work really well for me because I don't remember anything. But my husband, on the other hand, he'll say something, and I'm like, why do you know that? He goes, I learned that in high school. So for some people, it stuck. For me, it just got me through. Then I went to Liberty University, went to college, and I became a teacher. It was interesting this morning whenever they talked about the longevity, the history of teaching. You know, that really resonated with me. My grandfather was a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher. My mother was a teacher. She was a master teacher. And of course, you know, I knew I could do a teacher, nurse, or secretary, so I went into teaching. But whenever I got into teaching, I remember I walked into that classroom and I thought, I'm going to be stuck in this room the rest of my life. And whenever I actually started teaching, I realized it wasn't working. There was something wrong with it. It was inefficient. It was ineffective, and it wasn't teaching kids what they really needed to know. So I stepped out of teaching. My mom was like, how can you do that? But I knew I couldn't breathe if I continued. One of the other ladies I heard this morning talked about how the way schools are is hurting our kids, but it's also hurting our teachers. I just knew for me, I remember every Sunday night I would cry, do I have to go back? And I just couldn't continue to do that. So whenever I stepped out of teaching, I went to work at Liberty University School of Lifelong Learning, which is now Liberty University Online. Anybody of you know Liberty Online? It's a great program. It was quite interesting, though. One of the things that I had to do, that was back whenever they had the VCR tapes, and they had the videos recorded by the professors and then the VCR tapes. So we made sure people, you know, I helped people figure out what they needed to meet their educational goals. Sometimes I read the transcripts. How many of you, getting into college and high school transcripts seems so scary? Over the last 20 years, I've worked with homeschoolers. And I will have people whose kids are in first grade be like, what about transcripts? I'm like, dude, they're easy. Don't worry about that. What was brilliant about, God just uses every experience that I've had. And in that program, I had to evaluate transcripts. Do you know what? They are just a piece of paper that lists the classes and the grade and the credit. That's all it is. So whenever I now advise people to, is this too loud? Are you guys okay? Is it pretty loud? Okay. That's good. I'll hold it down a little bit. Because my voice is kind of loud anyway. I'm a loud talker. But, I can demystify that transcript aspect. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. But whenever I was thinking about what's important for kids to know, I thought, well, I should think about what was important for me that I learned whenever I was a teenager. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to ask the audience. I want you to put on your thinking caps for a minute. I want you to think of the 5 very important things you learned in your teen years or in high school. So then I thought, well, if I'm going to ask you guys that, I probably should think about that too, right? I couldn't think of 5. I thought of 3. Anybody have some? You raised your hand.
I took a religion class, which was marriage, and we had to actually pretend that we were graduating with a high school degree and then get married, find a job in the newspaper, and get an apartment. And I found out in high school that I wanted to go to college and didn't want to get married out of high school.
Anybody else? Something come to mind right away?
I learned to drive in high school.
Oh, that's exactly right. That was very useful. Yeah. I learned 3 things. I was in a choir, and we were a national competitive choir, and I learned that excellence is possible. It just takes a lot of practice, a lot of work. I also learned that I could earn more money teaching a piano lesson to a little child than I could standing behind a counter at a garden center. And I also learned that I could make money without even trying by selling candy from my desk. Just these brilliant entrepreneurial lessons came to me. I also learned I'm not very good at math. Well, at least I thought I wasn't very good at math. And I learned that a lot of what I learned wasn't really important. So I want to talk about what is really important. Isn't it a shame? We all went through high school. We all went through our teen years, yet nothing that, except driving, that was brilliant. Very little of what we learned was absolutely important to our life. And I want to think about what it is in school. I want us to challenge some of our presuppositions about what is important for kids to learn, because we want to make sure what they're learning is what they need to know. I know whenever I graduated from high school and then graduated from college, that I got out of college and realized I was very not prepared for my life. And I think one of the crimes of what happens with our schooling is that we go through 12 years of schooling, and these kids and families are trusting, okay, we're preparing for what we need to do. If we do this, if we get good grades, if we do this, we're going to be successful. Then they get out of school, some have tons of debt, and they're not prepared. And that's a crime. I think it's even worse whenever, I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a minute, but whenever somebody who doesn't fit in the education model, they are labeled as bottom of the class. They're labeled with special words. And really, they just don't fit in that model. And they become labeled as failures before they even get to start life. And I think that is terrible. I really do, because I believe every person has brilliance. And we just have to help them find what it is they're good at. And the spectrum of intelligence, I don't think really matters. Because you can find somebody who's brilliant that has a very low IQ that can do what they love to do very, very well. And that's very important. It's as important as a brilliant person doing what they do very well, and everywhere in between. Ooh, that wasn't even in my notes. How many of you have ever heard the book Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto? It helped me understand why teaching didn't work for me. And he talks about 7 hidden agendas in compulsory education. I just want to go over those really quick. One of them is confusion. We teach it, the way schools are is we teach everything in silos, everything separate, and nothing is connected. And so kids are like, here's math, but I don't understand when I would use that. Here's history and literature, and we could teach it all as a whole. In fact, one of the programs I started was Masters Academy of Fine Arts, where we take, I think the classical model is great. You take the history, you learn the art and the music and the drama of that history, because our history impacts our art, impacts our culture, impacts our music. Do you know who was Mozart and George Washington living at the same time? And so that world is important to kind of see the bigger picture rather than just the little individual components. So whenever you're thinking about the program you're doing or you're teaching the teens, make it have context, help it connect. That's so important. Another thing is the class position. Talked about that just a minute ago. If you do really well, I must be at the top of my class. Well, that means you're at the bottom of your class, or you're behind me. Tell me something that you're really good at. What's something you're really good at? Yes. You're really good at math. Okay, do you do that for your career? Okay, you know what? You are so far ahead of me, I must be a failure. I crochet really well. Anybody else crochet? Okay, so you might be as good as I, but you know, you're probably a failure to my crocheting because I'm top of the class for crocheting. But that's not real life. Real life is we all have our expertise. We all have our interests. And wouldn't it be a shame if all of us knew exactly the same thing? There would be no use for all of us. Half of us would not even need to be here, right? So whenever we demand that everybody knows the same thing, and then we have this competition of I'm better because I know blank, that's crazy. We need to honor and recognize what we know and what other people know and how we can come together as a society and community and share that with each other. Does that make sense? Another thing was indifference. Nothing is very important. You know, sit down here, we need to learn this. And so we study, and then the bell rings, it's like, okay, time to be done. That's not real learning. If you've been curious about something, don't you delve into it? Don't you, you know, if you have a child that's really interested, I met this I think he was a first grader. He was fascinated by plumbing. Swear, he brought the plumbing book. And he's like, do you know you need to vent this and you need to do that? And I'm like, first of all, this kid is weird, but we're all kind of weird. But the depth of knowledge that he had was amazing. There was a kid that one of my friends, her son, was fascinated by, of all things, carnivals. Okay? I'm going to talk a little, so curiosity is really an interesting thing. It's a little side note. Whenever we allow ourselves and our kids to be curious, it's amazing what they learn. So this kid was fascinated with carnivals, so much to the point that he created a carnival in this room, and he set it up, and he made it all there, and it would go, and then his mom told me, he says, not only does he set up the carnival, but it's a traveling carnival. So he would let it be in that room for a week, and then he would pack it up and move it to a different room. And it would have the carnival in the dining room for that week. Then he would pack it up and move it to a different room. Now, how crazy is that? But think about those skills. That kid was learning logistics, engineering logistics, right? And I heard later that he was doing brilliant things because he was curious, and she allowed him to delve into his curiosities. So schools teach indifference, but when we have the opportunity to help our kids learn, we can let them delve into their curiosities. Another thing they talk about is an emotional and intellectual dependency. Emotional dependency. Oh, look, you got a gold star. You got a happy face. Let's all be happy for them. Ooh, you got a big red X. That means you should be ashamed of what you did. Just because we missed a mark on our test shouldn't depend upon our self-worth. The other part of that is the intellectual dependency. We seem to have verification that what we know is right. So whenever we take a test, we're told, yes, you know this information. We have to have what we know verified by an authority. You can't just know something because you know it. You have to have it be like, yeah, that's worth knowing, and I approve of your knowing. I call that the tyranny of the expert. You know, when you think about, oh, I don't know if I really know that or not. I got to find an expert. I think you need to stop and say, wait a minute, do I know this? We need to teach our kids to be confident in what they know. Yes, I know this. So anyway, and then curiosity. Curiosity has no place in school. This is mine, not his. You know, whenever you go to school, whenever you teach school, you realize that, you know, the kid comes in, I'm so excited, I've got a bird's nest right outside my house, and it does this and this. It's like, well, that's nice, Johnny, but go sit down and don't talk about that. We need to study rocks today. We miss an opportunity to again, feed that curiosity? What could he have learned if we would have really studied that instead? It's interesting when we think about, in the description I talked about how much people learned back then. Nowadays, our teenagers are being expected to sit in their seat and listen and not do real work. Years ago, you watch any of these old shows, and they're building houses. They're running the farm. They're running the family business. They were doing real life work. Now they are not allowed to. And so what do? Turn to video games. Video games where they have this false sense of really doing something when they're really doing nothing. So as we're thinking about what teens should know, we need to think about what kind of environment they have. Do they have the opportunity to do real life stuff? My dad bought this car, and he and my brother worked on it and put it and fixed it and got it together. That was real life stuff. I think we need to find ways to engage our kids to do real life work now, when they're young. Not wait until, okay, now you're 18, now you can go out and do real life stuff. Do real life stuff now. So as we're thinking about, and the other thing about, in the olden days, the literacy rate was so high. If you look at the books, anybody look at a 5th grade textbook from the 1800s? Can you spell those words? I can't. And the books that they were reading are college level books. So we think that because school, got accessible for everybody, that we've somehow become better. And I feel like we've kind of become less. We've expected less. And so one of the things that we did a lot whenever, I'm going way off course. One of the things whenever I was raising my kids, I wanted to make sure that they could read well and were well read. I wanted to make sure they could write well, and I wanted to make sure that they could speak to people. So in reading, I realized that sometimes we can't sit and read. Try as I might, I tried to get my daughter to read, and she goes, why? Why do I need to read that book? And I'm like, because I said so. Well, that didn't work. But when we were in our car traveling, I put on some of the coolest books. There's one book called Girl of the Limberlost. It just made me want to go live in the woods, or Lad the Dog, or Little Lord Fauntleroy. Some of these books that are not necessarily the most modern, but you got to live in and experience somebody else's life in a different time period, and it was so rich. So anyway, as we're figuring out what we need to learn and what we want for our teens, I want to challenge your educational philosophy. I don't know if you have how many of you have programs that you run? Any of you have programs that you run or are part of? Many of you do, I'm sure. It's important to figure out what your educational philosophy is. Because if your educational philosophy, you've got to decide if you're going to school your kids or educate your kids. I know in Michigan you have to do 3 years of math, 4 years, many years of math, biology, chemistry, physics, 4 years of English. And whenever dealing with homeschoolers, I've dealt with homeschoolers for a long time. Oh, I didn't even tell you that. I started a program called Homeschool Connections, which is a 1 day a week program. Parents come and choose whatever classes they want, kind of like the university model they were talking about. I started that in 2002. We've had 7 campuses, about 800 kids come each week to take classes with us. Then I started a program called High Point Hybrid, which is a 2 day a week, I liken it to a 2 day a week private school, where the teachers teach 2 days, and then the parents teach the rest of the days. And that's been around for 7 years. But, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, I know. Whenever dealing with homeschoolers, they're very concerned about finishing their curriculum. And sometimes I want to say, stop. Are we worried about schooling our kids or educating our kids? Do we need to check off the boxes? And besides, what curriculum do they need to know? When my daughter started homeschooling, she was in 4th grade. I bought her a 4th grade curriculum. She's the kind that I could say, this is what you need to do for the week, and she'd disappear in her room for 2 days and come back and say, I'm done. And after 2 weeks, she came and said, Mom, I really like homeschooling, but when am I going to learn something I don't already know? I'm like, what do you mean? You're fourth grade. I bought fourth grade curriculum. What's the problem? So I gave her the test, the chapter test, and realized she knew almost the whole fourth grade curriculum. And that got me to thinking, who determined this was important for my child to know? And I got to thinking, and then I got really suspicious about curriculum. Then I kind of threw curriculum away. But I still love curriculum, so I still bought curriculum. And we still kind of like, there were things that she would get fascinated with and we would love. But when I threw the curriculum away and we kind of like delved into what we really wanted to know, we learned so much more. I encourage people to get a curriculum. Use it as a springboard, but don't use it as a judge or a trap. The secret of public school teachers is they rarely finish their curriculum. So, but homeschoolers think that's where they get judged. Did I do enough? You know. So even as we're figuring out what our teens know, we need to kind of say, what is it they need to know, and is this the best way to learn it? So one of the things I wanted my kids to do is to be well read. I mentioned that. Well, to be well read, you have to know Shakespeare, right? So one of the ways that we did Shakespeare is by being in a theater group. We did 5 Shakespeare plays. My daughter was Lady Macbeth, and she was Lady Macbeth. Yada, yada, yada. She ended up going to public school. She was in 11th grade. In her AP class, the teacher's like, okay, class, we have to learn Macbeth. And she's like, yes. The rest of the teacher was like, okay, this is da-da-da. And she's like, no, that's not really how you pronounce that name. She goes, no, that's not really how that goes. Because her theater teacher had her doctorate in Shakespearean literature. And so she knew Shakespearean literature. She realized the best way for her to finish that class was to read a book during class, because the teacher really didn't appreciate my daughter telling her how the Shakespeare goes. But for us, the best way to learn it was actually doing it. You know, if you require your kids to learn Shakespeare by sitting and reading silently, it's not going to work, because it's not meant to work that way. You got to talk it through and walk it through and act it out to really embrace that and to get to know it. So what is important to learn? The next thing is time. One of the things that I think is our kids, their time is taken up. They go to school, they come home, they get a snack. They go to their sports, they come home, eat, do their homework, and go to bed, and repeat every time, right? But that's not how real life is. We're trapping them in this endless cycle of busyness. And so to step away from that and give our kids time to be curious, time to delve into what they're interested. But what is the fear if they have too much time? They might be bored, right? How many of you, a lot of parents, a lot of people are afraid of their kids being bored? Yeah. It's a scary thing. They're bored. I'm bored. I'm bored. I'm bored. I'm bored. I have a definition for boredom. You heard it at my other seminar if you were there. Boredom is the time before you decide what to do next. That's all it is. Once you decide to do whatever you do next, you're not bored anymore, right? But until you decide what to do, you're kind of bored. My daughter, whenever she was young, I said, she kept saying, Mom, I'm bored. Mom, I'm bored. And finally I said, next time I hear that, I'm going to hear, I want chores. And she goes, okay. So we made a list of everything she likes to do. And we put it on the refrigerator. And she came out and she goes, Mom, I'm so... Never mind. Because in real life, that's part of time management skills, isn't it? What are you going to do with your time? And if we fear this boredom is just that time where you're allowed to be creative. You have to decide what you're going to do. You're allowed to rest. You've got to figure out what to do. And I think one of the things that's challenging for our kids is when they get bored, they go to video games. They don't do real life. So it's hard. This whole video thing is such a trap. But I think that to teach our kids what they can do during that time is really, really important. Another thing is important about how you learn. I know for me, my husband, he can read it and he knows it. For me, the reason I could do this crochet thing is I watched somebody do a video of it and I could follow along. I like to experiment, try it. How do you learn best? How many of you can learn just by reading something? How many of you have to have somebody show you? How many of you just have to try it yourselves? My daughter called me and she says, Mom, we're moving. I've got this hole in the wall. Can you help me? Can you tell me how to fix it? I'm like, no, I can't. I have no clue. 3 days later, she sent me a picture of this beautiful wall. And I said, how did you do that? Guess how she did it? Thank you very much. You can know anything from YouTube, you know? So, yeah, how do you learn best? How do you let kids learn best? I had a friend whose kids wanted to know what was under the ground, so they gave them a shovel. They dug this big hole in the ground. They found all kinds of really cool things, you know, because they allowed them to do that. I also, thinking about all day, everyday school, you guys are in an all-day seminar today. I was just not frazzled, but like kind of trying to get here to get settled after that last seminar, which was great. But how do you feel after, have you ever done a 3-day all-day seminar? How do you feel?
Just taking any more information in.
Yeah, my brain is full. We are giving our kids a 5-day, all-day seminar for 40 weeks out of the year for 12 years. They just can't handle that. It's interesting whenever I've had high schoolers come from public school or traditional school into a 1-day-a-week program or a 2-day-a-week program. They come to me and say, Mrs. G, this is bizarre. I thought this was such a joke. How am I going to learn anything if I'm used to 5 days a week every week and it's only a 1-day-a-week program? But they come to me and say, I learned so much. And I realize why. Because they're given the information, and then they have to come home and read it and do the homework and struggle with it and think about it and figure it out. Then they come back the next week and get to talk about it and process it. Their mind has time to process things. Where's my time? Okay. So I think that's really important to give our kids the time to think. I think time to think is something very undervalued. When do we just sit and think, let our minds think and process things? One last thing is, what is our purpose? Are we filling a bucket? Kind of like, you know, a mama bird comes and shoves the food in the baby bird's mouth. Traditional school is, open your head, I'm going to shove all this information, and you got to shove it all back. So is that what our role is as educators, or is our job to light a fire, help people find their passions and find out what they really want to know? All right, that's the introduction. I better move a little faster. Part of what I think is very important is helping kids understand who they are and how they were built and how they were created. There are some, oh, here it is. I think for me, I think a little different than some people. I have different ideas and different way of doing things. And I think sometimes for me, I felt like there's just something very different about the way I think. And maybe I'm not quite living up to how other people think. But whenever I took some of these personality tests, have any of you taken personality tests, some things like that? I just want to tell you about the few that I love. I love Clifton's Strength Finders. Anybody take a Strength Finders test? All my life, I love to sew. I love to do projects, but I really have a hard time finishing. Whenever I would sew my shirts, I couldn't put the buttons on. I just was ready for the next thing. And I felt like that was a character flaw. I am not a finisher. I am not good. What Clifton does is identifies 34 strengths. And my strengths are all upfront strengths. I am an idea person. I have ideation. I think of things. Then I'm strategic because I want to figure out my ideas. Then I am an activator. I am ready to go. And I will start before I got it all figured out. So adaptability is a strength. And because I know those strengths, the kind of people that I work really, really well with are the finishers. You know, people who love to finish, love to work with me because I'm like, here's what I wanted to do, but I can't get it done. They're like, I'll do it. So once I know my strengths, I can find the people who complement and work well together. And it also helps me to realize this is what I'm really good at. In school, our weaknesses are identified. You know, oh, you're great at reading, but look how bad you are at math. We need to focus on this math. Okay, you need to have some math skills, except your phone can do anything you need these days, right? But what if we strengthened our strengths so that they were so powerful that our weaknesses weren't even an issue? I think teens need that. Another personality test is the Enneagram test. Anybody do the Enneagram? Awesome. I love the Enneagram. It helps me understand how other people think and operate. I'm an Enneagram 8. Ooh. I don't know if you, let me see, I wrote it on here, Enneagram 8, is it on here? Oh, Enneagram 8 is a challenger. I'm an Enneagram 8 wing 7, which is a nonconformist. Does that make sense? Does that make sense why I'm up here talking at a hybrid program? You know? Because I always question things. Why are we doing it that way? Is that the best way to do it? Because I think that way, I have a really, working with people who tell me, number one, this is how it's done. I figured out the best way to do it, and that's the only way to do it. So it helps me understand how my personality and their personality might bump into each other, or how I can accept what they're saying and be okay with who I am while they're saying that. So if they know how to work with people, that one is very good. The other one is a Myers-Briggs. That one, I had notes on the other ones. That one identifies 16 personalities. I am an ENFP, which is a campaigner. No surprise there. You can find interest tests, career tests, lots of different tests that kind of help kids know who they are. And I think if they come out of their teen years knowing who they are, knowing what their personalities are, knowing how they're designed, that will help them step into real life confidently, because they're not weird. They might be different, but that's okay because that's how they were created. And it empowers them to know what they want to do. So, what do they really need to know in life? I wrote this, so I'm going to read it. Teens need time and space to be curious, to work, to develop their talents, to understand who they are, to dream, to practice. Let go of checklists and shoulds and give kids time to learn. Is that the one? Oops. So they should be able to talk to strangers, find their way around without their phone. Can you find your way without? I moved to a new town, and my phone died the third time I was trying to find my house out in the middle of the country. When you have to stop and ask somebody, that's so old-fashioned. But I found my house that way. They need to know how to manage assignments, workloads, and deadlines. They need to know how to contribute to the running of a household. They need to know how to handle interpersonal problems, cope with ups and downs, earn and manage money, not just get a job, and take risks. So all of those skills are not necessarily academic skills. They do need academic skills. We know that. They need to know how to read. They need to know how to communicate well. Reading, there was a book that we used called English from the Roots Up, which was Latin roots and Greek roots. And we played games with those, and my kids learned those. And I think that was the most valuable thing we ever did, because it didn't matter what they were reading, they could understand what the vocabulary was. They didn't get stumped in reading. They need to write well. IEW, I saw they had a booth out here. Institute for Excellence in Writing. Thank you. That I word just left me for a second. It can get a little bit rote, but it teaches them the structure of writing and how to craft a good good writing. It's interesting with my programs, we used Institute IEW for years. The colleges know whenever they have a homeschool connection student because they know how to write. Because schools aren't teaching them how to write. They aren't teaching them proper grammar. They aren't teaching, proper grammar. Shirley Grammar is an excellent program. So to teach our kids, this is so important to communicate, to write well. Math, they need basic skills. Again, they can learn. Now, I have to caveat this with, if they're going into a career that requires certain things, if they're going to be a doctor, kind of in that kind of case, you need to start what their goal is and work backwards. If they're going to be a doctor, then you know they need a lot of math. They need a lot of science. They need to know how to do that. But for most of the population, they're not, you've got to figure out what is it they're interested in. Give them the skills. If they're going to learn biology, could we make it life biology? Could we learn how biology works on how we take care of our bodies, how we take care of our animals, how we take care of our garden? Make it real practical. I think whenever I did biology, I didn't realize it was just about life. It was just real stuff. Chemistry blew my mind. So I think we need kitchen chemistry and life chemistry, because it was just a few years ago that I realized to get a stain out is a chemical reaction. I just thought it was putting stuff on there and scrubbing it really hard, but it's a chemical reaction, and I didn't know that. So I think we need to make these topics be real relevant to who we are and make them real. Social studies, I think it's valuable to go back and read original reports, original documents. They've got to learn logic and how to determine the truth. I think that truth factor is just because somebody said so. This is true because it was on TV. This is true because it was on the internet. Well, we need to teach them to dig farther. Is it really true? How do you know it's true? Was that a reliable source? What is the original document? Teach them to prove what it is they're learning. Don't be deceived. Is that logic real or is that logic false? So I think those are the skills that our kids these days need to know. Because I tell you, with AI and all of the stuff that's coming out, I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that looks real that we just don't know. I think also a little healthy dose of skepticism. Is that really real? I don't know. Let me think about that. What's my time? I think it's also very important to expose them to the arts. Do our kids get to hear classical music? Do they get to go to an opera? Do they get to go to a symphony? I know they know bands and music, but do they get to know kind of some of that history? And the arts and the drama, the theater. I think those are all so important. You think of somebody who's well-read or refined, they have an exposure to some of those things that I think is important. Life skills, like I said, take care of themselves, their environment, time management, and relationship skills. These last two things are really big. How to cope with failure and what to do if they fall and how to take risks. That's another thing school taught. School teaches that failure is bad. And it's not. I had a situation where, well, we all know, you ride a bike, you're going to fall. You're going to fail. You're going to fail. I think that needs to be labeled right up front. Sometime in life, you're going to fail. So what? What do you do about it? Yes?
I always tell my kids, the only failure is not learning from it.
Exactly.
You only fail if you don't learn.
Exactly.
And why you did.
Because it is a learning experience. Well, you learn not to do it that way. Do it a different way. Try it again. There's a new concept about, we've protected kids for so long, that now there's the idea of do hard things. Let your kids do hard things. I'm watching this guy on Instagram. He's riding his bicycle from the tip of Alaska to the tip of Argentina. Do hard things. They don't have to be that hard. But some kids are afraid to do anything. But let kids do hard things. I had a friend who's like, oh, my son, he wants to go on a rock band tour around America. I'm like, okay. She goes, but I can't let him do that. Why? When would he be able to do that? If he doesn't do it now, you want to set them up for success, but let them fail. Let them have those failure opportunities to then show them what they need to do when they fail. And don't rescue them. Now, if they need rescued, you are their safety net, or whoever is their safety net. But you need to let them figure out okay, so what are you going to do about that now? You're doing something hard, you ran into a stumbling block. Where are you going to put your foot next? What's your next step? Encourage them to think ahead. Think of the next thing. You're there to discuss, but don't solve their problems. Help them do hard things. Allow them to do hard things. And entrepreneurship skills. This is something that with homeschoolers is very strong. The entrepreneurship skills come out because we think different. We're giving our kids time to do things differently. I think it's very important for everybody to have a skill where they can earn $1,000 in a week if they have to. If you had a crisis and you had to come up with $1,000, could you? Well, you have a lot of furniture you probably could sell. You have a car you could sell. I mean, there are ways to do things, right? I could teach piano lessons. Some people could cut hair. Other people could build a website. So I think that we don't need just to teach them how to get a job. We also need to teach them how to earn money as they need it. And then what to do with the money. This idea of going into debt, it's so hard whenever kids go to college and end up in so much debt they can hardly survive. So earn money and what to do with the money they have. So I'm going to talk a little bit about getting into college. One of the things I learned about, are you guys good? Okay, I know I'm talking fast, but I had 25 pages to, and I'm like, give as much as I can.
We need all the information.
Thank you. Getting into college, first of all, the question is college required? I think that's a big question. Sometimes it is. I know when I wanted to be a teacher, I told my mom and dad, I really don't want to be a teacher. I want to go into business instead. And they're like, no, you have to get your education degree. So I got my education degree. I told you how that turned out, right? It's interesting because I feel that it's come back around. I just didn't know education included so much. I thought it was just teaching. But I feel like everybody needs to have some business skills. Your life is a business. Money comes in, you have expenses, money goes out. You've got to have that financial literacy to do that. But whenever you're thinking about college, when you're thinking about success, let's start there. What is the definition of success? For my parents, we were successful if we had gone to college. I just came across this one. I think it's brilliant. I think success is whenever they become adults and they don't rely on the government and they don't rely on their parents to live their life. Whatever else yes, sir.
Add this component.
Yes.
This is how I view it. Then they can write it down. Yeah. It's that they're comfortable as a person and they have the opportunity to have happiness.
Yes.
Because there are a gajillion people who are miserable, have academic diplomas, billions of lots of money, unsuccessful relationships.
Yep.
I'm in a field that I deal with these people as a lawyer, and we need to remeasure success.
I agree. I think we need to redefine it. Because you see these football players that are brilliant, they're making tons of money, and their life is empty. So I think we need to figure out what is success and help them define what is success. So then college, if it's important, then do it. If it's not important, then figure something else out. And some people are so determined to get into the best college they can. I question that too. Community college for my daughter was wonderful. So a lot of times homeschoolers start taking college classes when they're in high school with dual enrollment. Yep. By the time they graduate high school, they've almost got their associate's degree. And then they create their transcript. And I have people who say, well, what's my transcript going to look like? Well, you put everything that they've learned and their college credits on there, turn that into a college. most high schoolers haven't done a lot of college work. Here's this homeschooler with 20 hours of college credit. That proves that they can get into college. Then you start at community college and you get the first couple years of community college. Did you know it's easier to get into a university by transfer than it is to be a freshman? You transfer into the university, you want to graduate and spend your next 2 years at the university. Then if you want to, then go get your master's degree at the next level college. And if you really want a doctorate, then go and apply to be a doctorate at the high level college, if you really want to do that. So, those that come through an alternative education program doesn't mean you can't get into college. Talking about transcripts real quick, remember I said I saw them all the time? People have asked me, what I love to see is people taking their child's life experience and putting it on a transcript. My daughter with her Shakespeare, we count it, so you can count college credit 3 ways. You can count it by a course you finish. If you successfully finish a course, you can put it on your transcript. If you study it 135 hours, that kind of is a credit's worth of study, because you can never finish studying history, right? And then if you are proficient in it. So if you speak Spanish really well, and you could put that on your transcript because you know Spanish 1, Spanish 2 maybe. So my daughter's theater experience, we counted Theater 101, or Introduction to Theater, Introduction to Acting, Shakespearean Literature, because in that learning, we had covered all of those things. So think about whenever you're creating your transcripts, if you're in a non-traditional program, the rest of the stuff. If the kids have done a lawn service for the last 5 years, that's business, introduction to business. That's horticulture 101. I don't know, whatever you can, and you have to use the terms that they would think of in school. Just translate it into what it is, home ec, whatever. So you can create a beautiful transcript. If you put college classes on the transcript, give them more credit. Like if you're if it's a 4.0 for high school, I would count them as a 5 point, which raises their credit, their score. I also think I count college English for their high school, because anyway. Then you also have things like, starting your own business. So many kids start their own business. Start nonprofits. If you want to get into college, put that you started a nonprofit. Put that you started a business. You're well-read. You're well-traveled. All of these things give kids so much exposure and experience. If they want to start, somebody was telling me about a virtual reality where they could go and visit to be a veterinarian, or go and find out what being an attorney is like, or, experience some of those things. Have the opportunity to follow somebody, be mentored by somebody. Try it. So I think giving our kids the exposure for a lot of different things is really important. And I just want to finish with Start Now. Detox from online control. But that requires us to do that too. We have to put our phones down. We have to put things down. Go outside. Be in the real world. Live in the real world. Unlock creativity. Develop your talents and interests. Teach our kids to dream big. Take risks. Set them up to succeed, and let them fail. Be there whenever they do. So that's kind of what I just wanted to inspire you to think about education differently for our teens. And if you're working with teens, just encouraging them to do things different. So that's all I wanted to say. I wanted to get that through because I want to also have time for discussion, because I'm sure you have ideas or thoughts. Any questions or things that you would like to contribute? Yes?
There was just one thing, and I really would like to make the distinction. So you said social studies is important, but sure, okay. You said social studies is important, and then you went on to describe civics. I feel that social studies, which kind of was invented, in the 70s, I think when we we're about the same age, start school, I feel that that has been a problem, and I feel like what they need to learn is civics, and what they need to learn is actual history. I mean, when you go to college, there's no such thing as social studies department. There's a history department, and I think there's a difference.
Very good distinction, I agree. I agree, because I think social studies gets into, you know, there's a lot of things that kids go to study in college that are really pretend. You know, they're really like not really useful for anything except to explore the depths of your mind. You know, and so I think you're right. I think history, knowing what the history is, civics, how to be a good citizen, how our country works, how other governments work. You know, I think that was a very good point, yes.
I just wanted to say that I run a high school club at our school, and one of the very first things that I have them do is I have them do the personality test. And I have them understand how they learn, kind of where their strengths are, and then we also take that into consideration when they're looking at the different schools they're interested in and in their job hunting.
Yes, that's wonderful. I had a friend who did a lot of coaching, and that's really where I found out about the personality tests. He did them on me, and he helps kids get into college because he does those things. It's fascinating if you do an Enneagram test and then read what it says. It's like, oh, they knew me. Or the other ones, it's like, oh, I'm known. But then also do you like a big school? Do you like a small school? Do you want a big city, a little city? You know, so really kind of delving into that a little bit more. I think that's brilliant. Did you have something?
Wondering about motivation with teenagers in a class, like an IAW class or something, where I sometimes have a struggle with students turning in their work and whatnot, where the motivation isn't necessarily coming from parents and whatnot.
Yeah. You know, I think it's very interesting. I've dealt with kids whose parents come to me and said, I can't get them off the couch. They are so shut down, they can't function. I think we've got to figure out a way to make it important. You know, I make the assignment be, if you could write a letter to somebody that you really want to know, you know, or try to tap into that curiosity. I think sometimes what they really want to know is shoved away. I had a mom, we sat down and talked. This kid was 12, 14 maybe, and she says, I can't get him to do any work. I'm like, okay, tell me what he's actually doing. Is he laying on the couch all day? She goes, no. There's this Kettering College, which is like the engineering school up in Michigan that people really like to try to get into. He's going every Monday and Thursday nights to help this professor who does robotics, because he's so fascinated in robotics that he's the teacher's assistant, and I can't get him to get up here and do his math homework. I'm like, enroll the kid in college. I had another one who said, you know, I can't get him to do anything. I'm like, well, what is he doing? He goes, well, his dad runs this, it might have been a scrapyard company, I don't know. But he had big equipment. And he goes, yeah, my son is selling like bulldozers online. Okay, so I don't see the problem here. You know, I think that we have to make it real. If you could write about, you know, what is it you want to write about? Whenever we first started homeschooling, I asked my kids, I went to my first homeschool conference was a little bit of an unschooling flair. And they talked about every morning they would wake up and say, okay, what are we going to do today? And one was going to build Legos all day. Another one was going to do art all day. And so they kind of planned their day. And at the end, they would come back and say what they did. And so I just asked my kids, if you could, you know, if you could know anything, what would you want to know? One of my daughters said, I would like to know the difference between a rabbit and a hare. I'm like, okay. The other one wanted to know, she goes, I want to know what probability is. Well, let's figure those out. You know, whenever you ask them, let them, you know, nothing is like off limits. Sure, let's delve into that. So I think part of it is making it important, you know, and maybe it's not important what the assignment is, but maybe they need to come up with their own assignment that might be important for them.
Yeah, just building on that, I think teens are a resource for us. So at AIM Academy, we've been allowing our students to have a voice and start clubs. And Jeanette's with us today. I'm going to embarrass her. She's our student intern. And she came to me at the beginning of the year and said she was wondering about, could there be a newsletter or a newspaper at our school? I said, sure. And we helped her start it. And it's probably the best thing that happened this year. It's really remarkable because she ran the whole newsletter. She got other kids to join the staff. They organized a photo contest, essay contest. So that's where the energy is right now, and I'm sure you've seen the same thing in our online academy, is in what the teens are starting themselves. So I'm learning from that.
And that's wonderful. And that doesn't take a whole lot of adult control. You know, this whole idea of control, I think we need to step back and let our kids have those opportunities. You must have created a program where they felt like my ideas will be valid and heard if I share them. And I think that's wonderful.
I don't think intentionally, but I'm trying to be a lifelong learner.
Yes,
And that's what I learned.
yes.
Like, okay, and we had to get the parents to say, do we have permission? Is it okay if these kids get together and run
Yep.
this club?
Yep.
And then we got out of the way.
Right, get out of the way, yeah. Because our teens can do big things. I think that's the other thing, is they can do big things. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
What would you say about the, I know this is primarily geared towards teens, but how about like preteen, middle school kind of demographic? What are your thoughts about that in relation to what we're talking about?
I think middle school is a wasteland of, I think middle school is a dangerous place for kids. I think middle school is that time between their little kids and their grown-ups, you know, and I think it's a difficult time. But I think those principles still apply. You know, I think it's important to give them opportunities, to give them responsibilities, to give them the opportunity to try different things. If you wanted to, I don't want to do anything today. Okay, well, what does that mean? What do you want to do? If you're going to sleep all day, let me turn the light off and close the door, and you can sleep all day. And honestly, I've had some kids. I had a family, a kid who had not a Lyme disease, some disease, and his mom said she homeschooled him that year. He grew, was it 7 inches? He grew 7 inches. He slept half the time, but he was growing. You know, sometimes we don't realize physically what our kids need. So what do they need? You know, my daughter went through a really difficult time, and somebody advised me to use this question often. What do you need? I think for ourselves, I'm learning to ask myself that question. I don't give myself permission to rest very often, and so I can run on a lot of energy and then I kind of crash. And I think we need to teach people how to take care of themselves by saying, what do you need? Sometimes I just need to take a nap. Sometimes I need to go sit in the sunshine. Sometimes, I asked her what she needed, and she's like, I think I just need somebody to help me with the dishes. Okay, we can do that. That's part of self-realization, a little bit of tuning into what you need. So I think even with our kids, you seem to be having a difficult day today. What do you need? Tune them back into their head. Oh, what do I need? So what else? Anybody else? What time is it? Oh, we got 2 more minutes. Any other comments? Yes. Oh, got a bunch.
I just want to ask you, have you ever heard of something called like self-authoring, where they talk about, they do writing, so IW could be a thing where you write about, you know, kind of the, where do you see yourself next year, where do you see yourself 2 years, and then what is it you see yourself doing, and not only what are you doing, who would that help and who would that impact? And apparently they say if they can have goals, and the goals aren't just about me, but they're about who would I help and who would I impact, and they put those goals in writing, the numbers that achieve that go way up, than the ones who don't put it in writing.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant because we're casting a vision for our kids. Letting them say, here I am now, what could I imagine myself in 5 years? That would be a brilliant project. Yes, sir.
It'll be way too long. I want to hire you for an hour to let me tell you about my 17-year-old son.
I love,
I'm being serious.
okay,
Brilliant, and he went from public school, out of school, to a particular school, back to public school, dropped out of public school, went to the Cobb County in Georgia, and now he's doing online schooling, but he wouldn't do the online schooling that one of the excellent programs with which I'm familiar. So he's doing this one that's like absurdly easy, and he's far brighter than I am.
well, if he's just having to check the box, then he might be feeling futile.
And he's already thinking, I'm not going to go to college. I'm like, hey, although my parents made me go to college and then to law school, so he doesn't want to go that path.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, if he's happy and taking care of himself, that's his choice.
So I do have my business cards. I will set them right up here. I love talking to people. You are welcome to give me a call. Did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I was just wondering, because you mentioned that to not do checklists or do different type of ways of assessing their knowledge. So how do you what's your suggestion if you don't have a test to see what they know, how do you check them?
So how do you know? You bake the cake,
And it came out.
and if the cake comes out, then you did it.
Right.
What grade did you get on?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I have parents who are like, how do I grade my homeschoolers? Grades are pretend. Grade levels are pretend. Think about that. What is that for?
Yeah, on that, my observation or comment would be, having gone through all this education myself, don't worry about the grades. Worry about whether can they think, can they reason,
Yes.
are they curious?
Yes.
If they're curious intellectually,
Yes.
they're learning. If they
Yes.
want to move on to another topic, that means they're done with the other topic. So they do know it. So don't worry about testing,
Right.
which is why my organization wants to challenge compulsory education and all the homeschooling regulations, because that's crap. You
Right.
shouldn't have to do that to your students, much less
Right.
your own children.
In our own lives, do we have to pass a test to feel like we're successful or feel like we know something? How do we assess, do we know it good enough? I did it because I got the blanket done. You know? You did it because you got the cake done. You wrote the book. You got to the place. You know? I got the seminar written.
Okay, so I'm going to push back just a little bit. So coming from a business background, yeah, you do get assessed every year, actually, in your job. And you do have to write your goals, and they wrote their goals, and did you achieve it? And this is what we had for you last year, and you didn't make it, and why didn't you? So not every business does, but you don't know what your kids are going to do. So you got to kind of prepare them for assessment. But I think we can reframe it. What I used to tell my kids, they'd be like, oh, I've got this test. I'm like, oh, so today's the day that you get to go in and fill out your bragging paper. It's your bragging paper. All you're doing is you're bragging on what you learned.
Exactly.
And that's the difference. And so they're just telling what they learned.
Yes, testing is just finding out what you know and you don't know. You know, if testing is finding out whether you're good or bad, smart or dumb, it's totally inappropriate. But if testing is figuring out whether you know this or not, and if it's important to know, then you should be able to say, yeah, I know that. So I can't say there are no tests. You had to take a test to do your driver's license, right? You had to take a test. You didn't have to take a test to bring your baby home from the hospital. You should have. I remember that first day thinking, they made me go to class for 6 weeks and take a test to drive a car, and they're sending me home with a human being, you know. But
go to class to deliver, but not to take care
right, exactly. That was totally inappropriate, I'm sorry. But, you know, is it important? If it is important, then you have to learn it. And if you have to prove that you know it, then prove that you know it. Testing is just, do I know it or do I not know it? And if it's important to know, then learn it so you can pass the test. You know, but I think that the artificial grades, I have to get a grade for everything I do. Well, if you know it, then get a good grade. You know, whenever you see a typical homeschool transcript, a lot of times they're all A pluses because they didn't move on until you learned it. You know, that's just how it is. Thank you so much for being here. I enjoyed talking to you. I hope this helps encourage you as you educate your teens.